What you're looking at is a game I made for ArtFight last month that got me 0 points. If you're wondering why you didn't see it in the forum posts, don't worry, we'll get to that. As someone who's been a software developer for 8 years and tries to make games on the side, it's nice to say I finally finished something. So how did I do it? And why did I get 0 points? For those who have never heard of ArtFight, it's a yearly gift-giving competition that runs throughout July. The idea is that you join a team, upload your characters, and then start drawing other people's characters in what's called an attack. When you upload an attack, it gets scored depending on the kind of drawing it is. Different kinds of drawings get different kinds of scores. There's full body, half body, headshot, and simple shapes. The problem with me joining ArtFight is that I'd never really drawn before. I'd done a few sketches here on paper and a couple of drawings on digital, but I never really liked them and so I never put them out there. So I thought, maybe I should try pixel art. I thought I would do 4 or 5 drawings and then get back to programming. But every time I submitted an attack, the response was insane. Even if it was just pixel art, which is why I highly encourage you to participate next year. Never underestimate the power of a nice compliment, because when I saw these comments flooding in about how much people loved their drawings, it just made me want to keep going. And eventually, I drew 56 characters. Originally, I labeled these simple shapes, because they do look pretty basic and I was only having fun. I wasn't trying to points farm. A mod saw it and told me that, actually, these don't have to be simple shaped characters, they can be full bodied. And then actually, never mind, they look too similar and they had to be taken down. While I had read the rules about base use, I assumed that meant that you couldn't use bases that weren't your own, and didn't realize it meant that the character poses weren't allowed to look similar. But I also kind of argued that they're pixel sprites. What do you want me to do here? Either way, I didn't want to get kicked off of ArtFight, and so I took them down. But not before putting them all together into one big attack, and then only attacking my fiance instead, and just tagging everyone else in the description. Unfortunately, I'd also put out a video a week before, mentioning that I was going to make an ArtFight game, and that if people wanted their characters to be in it, they should drop their OCs in the comments. I realized that I could take my pixel sprites, create a base out of them, and then have them be actual playable characters in-game or NPCs you could talk to. And now, I felt like I was going to let everyone down, because this rule against bases meant that essentially I couldn't post any more attacks on ArtFight. I honestly thought I'd be the only one making a game for ArtFight, because most of the people on ArtFight are artists. That was kind of naive of me, because when I looked at the news posts there were actually 5 other ones that you should definitely check out. Anyways, after about 1,000 messages of different people's characters, I bookmarked and saved a bunch of them, and was ready to draw 100 because that's the most you're allowed to do for a mass attack. For those who don't know, a mass attack is when you attack more than one character. You can essentially have a video, or one big drawing, or any kind of medium, and I thought a game would be perfect for this. I would put all the characters in the game, have players walk around, talk to them, use the description from their character sheets, and then they could really see their OCs come to life. I decided I was going to make the game anyways. I would just do the same as I had done before. I would attack my fiance with a small drawing, and then everyone else could just be tagged in the description. Because I had to remove all of my attacks, it was unlikely that I was going to get to 100. I had managed to do 30 at that point. It did unfortunately take me a long time to put all those attacks into a separate drawing and then take them all down and then tag everyone, so I really didn't have much time left to draw any more characters. I had to actually make the game. So with that out of the way, how did I actually make this game? First, I looked at the drawings I had already made and drew a base for it. Then, to allow the players to move around the world, I drew the character facing south, east, and west. I then created little walk cycles for each character. I only needed an additional drawing per direction, and I'd done something similar for my game Spellbound. Then, as a way to thank people who had already attacked me, I decided to take the first 9 people who had attacked me and turn them into actual playable characters. For the game engine, I decided to go with GameMaker, as it's the one I'm most familiar with and I've spent hours trying to build my passion project Spellbound in. You may have already heard of GameMaker if you're familiar with Undertale, as it uses the same engine. The problem with pixel sprites is they're tiny. These were only about 50 by 50, and that's including the palette. To actually see these properly, you had to zoom in about 4 times, and so within GameMaker you can actually set the camera properties and the viewport properties. I won't go into detail on what that means, but essentially you set the camera properties to 1 width and height, and the viewport properties to 4 times that. So I set the camera properties to 192 by 192, and the viewport properties to 768 by 768, which is exactly 4 times the amount. This way, we're still working on a pixel level, but it's scaled up 4 times, and I don't have to touch anything else to do with scaling. Next, we import our character, and we set all the different ways it can animate. So here we have the north, the south, the east, and the west, and each frame. I played around with the FPS until I got a frame rate I was happy with, and this is exactly how it's going to look in game. I also found it super useful to keep on top of my folders and organization, so here you can see I have this Apple character and all of her different sprites inside this Apple folder, inside a folder called characters, inside a folder called NPCs, inside a folder called sprites. This might sound like something you don't need to do right away, but I honestly think it's a good idea. For the non-playable characters, I knew I would only need a south-facing sprite, but I wanted to make them a little bit more animated, so I used this trick I learned from my fiance where you just move them down one and it makes them look like they're bouncing, and I think it really adds a nice dynamic. So, now we have our sprites. How do we actually make it a playable game? Well, the first thing to do is create an object. And for me, I created object_player. I'm not going to go into super detail about all the code I wrote, but essentially if you want your character to move, you're going to want to create a step event. And inside that, have things like keyboard check, up, down, left and right, and then use this function, move and collide. I find this really useful because manually doing your movements can sometimes get a bit tricky, and for this, it just moves you where you want to go and then checks which objects to collide with. I also have it set the sprite index, which I then define in the create event here. This is because we don't just want to be this blank character, we eventually want to be able to turn into other characters. And so these get set when you interact with other characters. Don't forget to set your object's default sprite like so. Now that we have our basic object, we go back to our room and we drag it in. Now press play and you'll be able to see that you can move around with arrow keys. How cool is that? If you copied my code exactly, it won't run for you yet, and that's because you don't have object solid parent. This is the second object we're going to define. We're just going to create it here. While you could just create one solid object, it's actually a really smart idea to create a parent. That way, you only need to check the parent in this function, and then anything you want to be solid, you just define as a child from this object. I know this is getting a bit too technical again, so what I'll do is I'll just make this object parent, and I'll give it a random sprite, and then we'll drag that in as well. Now you can see when I move the character, it won't move past this object. I might go into details in a future video, but essentially this is how you make a game. So after doing this, I added more objects, and more barriers, and more rooms, and then some code to have those objects talk to each other when they're near each other, and a way to transition between rooms. If I had more time, this would look more interesting, but I was fine with it for now. Anyways, after a lot of bashing my head against the keyboard and trying to get things to work, it was finally working. You could walk around the game, move between rooms, talk to characters, become different characters. All I had to do now was put every single character I had drawn so far into the game. On the last day, I was testing some code, and unfortunately, there was a bug where you could talk to a character and you would get caught in an endless loop, and I was losing my mind. Fortunately, after praying to the gods of programming, I finally figured out what was wrong, and I fixed it. All was ready to be released. I did also make a short music track for this, but I don't remember how I made it or what I did to make it. I realize I haven't gone into much detail about how I made this game, but that's essentially it. If you want me to go into more detail, maybe I'll make another video in the future, but this is already 10 minutes long, and I feel like most people won't watch till the end anyways. But if you did, thank you so much, and please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps me, and you can expect more content like this in the future. Thank you so much. I really want to thank everyone who supported me while I was taking my attacks down. It was unfortunate, but people were really kind and they kind of agreed that it was unfair, even if it was against the rules. and I hope that maybe ArtFight could change the rules in the future. Please do not go and harass ArtFight or the ArtFight mods, as this is personal to me and I've already accepted the decision. I also want to thank everybody who attacked me during ArtFight. I ended up with 65 attacks, which is way more than I thought I would get, and I was really overwhelmed with the response. Thank you so much. Feel free to drop your ArtFights in the comments and I'll have a look at them for next year. I plan on doing another game next year, and thank you again. Take care of yourselves.